How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Redzone's roster previews episode, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Detroit Lions. Now, in this series, we are now on number 28. I started at number 32. It's basically my power rankings of where I rank the teams, and in each episode, I take a look at every single player, and I project whether they will make the team, be a practice squad player, or be cut from the team. And then at the end, I take a look at their schedule and predict how many wins they'll get and give awards to some of their top players who fit that category. So, with that being said, you can see the previous episodes up here in the top corner. And let's just start talking about the Detroit Lions. So before I start talking about the players, I do want to talk about what they did this offseason a little bit, because specifically, they are in a new regime. A new general manager, and a new head coach. And I really want to focus on their head coaching hire, which was Dan Campbell. I think Dan Campbell could be a very, very good coach. I think it reminds me of the Mike Vrabel hire for Tennessee. And yeah, they haven't won a Super Bowl in Tennessee, but that hire has worked out pretty well. I really think that Dan Campbell can be that next guy. And being completely honest, he is the reason that I have this team above the Atlanta Falcons, who I revealed in the last episode. It is literally maybe the only reason. You could make a case, I'm going to say that right away, I almost flipped the teams, they're pretty interchangeable, that the Falcons could have a better roster, and I do base it off of roster, but I also put in coaching into effect. So as an overall team, as you could call it, I have the Lions above, and I think Dan Campbell is really a big reason for that. And yes, I know he's already had some weird press conferences. He has his attitude, obviously, of what this team needs to be. He's talked about it, and I honestly like it a lot. I think he's being straight up. We haven't seen many coaches like him before, and this is a good test of the rest of the NFL, where this team can give this guy a shot, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think that the potential is he can be a really good culture building guy, and I think Detroit desperately needed that over the coaches they've had, previously. Specifically, Matt Patricia just didn't work out really. So now let's talk about the quarterback position, and there's a lot of change here, and that is because of the massive offseason move that we finally get to talk about this move, which was Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff and other picks. I believe in Matthew Stafford a lot. I really do. I will say, I think he's going to be elite for the Rams this year. Now, I don't think it would have been elite for the Lions anymore. So I'm not upset about them trading away Matt Stafford, even though I think he is a far superior player than Jared Goff, even right now, but even in a few years potentially. But I understand it. It wasn't really working out. You're starting over anyways. Let Stafford go succeed somewhere else. So I understand that. I also think it was a smart move to get Goff back in this trade. He pretty much had to be involved if they wanted to make the salaries work, but it was interesting that for them to say, no, we want this guy, and I think they can go with that. They can believe in him, in the culture that Dan Campbell's building. He does. He's very safe, I'd say. He works in the right scheme. I don't think a scheme pretty much anywhere else in the NFL will fit him as well, or at least have the highest potential for him, like a Sean McVay offense. So I do think he will go down a bit. He's not going to be an elite quarterback in this scheme for sure. I personally think they can try him out for a year or two, and if it's not working, maybe they look in the draft. So I think it was a smart play. It's a low risk, a potentially high reward. I don't think it's elite. I would rank him out of the quarterbacks we've covered so far. I probably would put him below Matt Ryan. So he's somewhere in the borderline top 20 range for me, top 22 or so. So he's decent. So you're fine there. It's not the best you've ever seen, though, and I don't think he's going to do as well in this new scheme as what he did for the Rams. And behind him, they also made some changes. They got rid of Chase Daniel, who was their backup for a few years. They bring in Tim Boyle. I've never thought was a great player. I think it was kind of just being behind Aaron Rodgers that made him succeed if he did have any opportunities. So I don't know how good he's going to be. I think it's a decent move, though, for a backup just to have him sit there on the roster. It's not the worst you could do at all. So that's fine for him to be a backup on your team. David Blau actually, to me, did okay a few years ago. I think it was a Thanksgiving game, I remember it specifically, where he did okay. He's kind of just stuck around on the practice squad since then. This is a new regime, so we'll see how much they like him. I have him staying on the practice squad just because I do think he does have a little bit of upside still. This is a decent quarterback room. It's fine. Not particularly elite, which is why this team is not ranked higher. But in retrospect, you did what you had to do this offseason. Yes, it's a downgrade from Stafford, and I'll say that straight up. But with the situation that you were given, you did okay flipping Stafford for your current quarterback. So then let's take a look at their running backs. Now, DeAndre Swift, I had going into the draft as my number 1 running back last year. I still think his ceiling could be that. I don't know if it's going to happen here in Detroit. He performed okay last year. I did have him in fantasy in a few leagues. I think he's an intriguing fantasy option. I do talk a little bit about fantasy football on this series as well. Them bringing in Jamal Williams, though, to me, does not show a huge amount of confidence, but them letting go of Kerryon Johnson did. So I do think that DeAndre Swift will be the lead back in this offense. He's overall pretty good. He's okay in the receiving game. I personally think they're going to lean more on Jamal Williams for that. But Swift has some power. I think he's overall a very balanced running back, and I like that a lot. I think he would be a decent option as a number 1 running back here in Detroit, and I do think he could succeed in this offense. And like I said, Jamal Williams will probably also be involved, I think, in the receiving game personally, but overall, I think they're going to kind of go with those two as their lead running backs, and that's a decent backfield. I think it was a decent move bringing in Jamal Williams. He just didn't get a whole lot of opportunities behind Aaron Jones, and so to really give him a straight-up number 2 role, I think, or it even could be closer to 50-50, but I personally would be going with DeAndre Swift as my bell cow, and then have Jamal Williams rotate in when needed. They don't have a lot of running back depth behind that. They drafted Jamar Jefferson out of Oregon State, so that is fine. As a 3rd running back, you can let him develop. He could be a practice squad player as well. And then at fullback, they have Jason Kabinda, a converted linebacker. We've seen that, I think, a little bit, maybe even some defensive players like Patrick Ricard convert to fullback. So it's doable. He's been fine. It's what they have on the roster right now, so I think that's what they're going to go with. He'll be fine as a fullback. So looking at your depth on this running back room, you're looking really at those top 2. Now behind them, they do have Michael Warren, who I liked coming out of Cincinnati. I think he's a practice squad level player. He could also compete with Jamar Jefferson for that 3rd running back spot. And then I don't think Dedrick Mills is personally an NFL level player. So the depth is decent here. It's 2 positions so far where you have like a borderline top 20 player. Really, is what you're looking at on this offense. That's why I think this offense is not going to be elite, especially when you consider this wide receiver room that we're going to look at. This is a huge weakness. I was shocked they didn't take a receiver earlier in the draft, but to get Amon St. Brown where they did was also a very good value. So I can completely understand that in retrospect. Now, I also didn't love the approach they really took in free agency because Tyro Williams gets cut relatively early on. I think it was before free agency, and they decided to bring him in. It seemed like he could have been the number 1. I don't feel comfortable with Tyro Williams as a number 1. He showed some flashes back in San Diego. He didn't do that much to me for the Raiders, so I really questioned them bringing him in. And so they also brought in Brashad Perriman. I don't feel great in either of them. Tyro Williams has not shown he can be anything above a number 2 wide receiver, and Brashad Perriman has also not really shown that he can be a number 1 target in the offense. He's bounced around a lot. He didn't work out with the Ravens. Depth piece for the Browns. Then he went over to the Bucks. And then here on the Jets, I know they had Jamison Crowder for sure was, I would say, their number 1 wide receiver. So they really don't have an alpha wide receiver. And I just don't trust either of those guys to be a top wide receiver, and this is why I kind of am relying on what I'll talk about in the next position at tight end, because I don't love this receiver room. I honestly think the receiver with the potential to do the most this year even could be Amon St. Brown, who it's been reported has been getting a strong connection with Jared Goff. And I would like to see that, because I think that St. Brown does have the highest upside out of anybody in this room, and he has the potential to step in right away and become an impact. So if you're looking at rookies looking to, be some top targets, I really think Amon St. Brown could be an option. I also really like Quintes Cephas. He didn't get a whole lot of playing time last year. I did like the value they got him at, though, out of Wisconsin. I thought he was going to be kind of a third-round player, and he ended up going to day 3. So he hasn't been given a whole lot of opportunities. He could compete for that third slot, but I really think St. Brown is going to be the favorite wide receiver in this room. Khalif Raymond, they bring in for special teams. He can return pretty well. So that's, I think, going to be their main focus with him, is to bring in that return level. And then they also have Damian Ratley, who has shown some speed. He's bounced around a bit, but I think he can also be a special teams impact player, maybe as a gunner or something like that. So I think that this is a wide set of skills on this wide receiver room, but I don't feel incredibly confident in it. They also just have a list of wide receivers that I actually like, almost all of them, that I have making the practice squad or being cut. It's risky. I have them keeping four wide receivers on a 12-man practice squad. I just think that you don't want to let go of any of these guys. I could understand letting go of Victor Bolden would be the one I think you could potentially let go of if I were to let one go. They brought in Geronimo Allison a few years ago, and he opted out of last season, so we didn't really see what he was up to. I do think they'll give him a shot on the practice squad, because you can't keep 2 players with any level experience, so I have him being one of them. If this new regime does not like Geronimo Allison, though, they can just let him go. Because, to be honest, he did not do much in Green Bay, and he kind of disappointed so far here. But if you gave him that contract, you're looking to maybe just see what he has. Chad Hansen, I think a connection with Dan Campbell. So because he spent some time in New Orleans, so he, I think, is a guy that they'll want to keep around on the practice squad. Like I said, Victor Bolden, he's been on the practice squad for a number of years now, so you could potentially let him go if this new regime does not like him as much as the old one. They brought in 2 really good rookies, and Sage Surratt definitely is better, so I want to keep him. He's a jump ball receiver, a physical guy, which I think is what they need on this team, honestly, because most of the players they have are speed. So to bring in a guy like Sage Surratt out of undrafted free agency was a big move, and I like that a lot. He can be a contested catch guy. And then I have Tom Kennedy being cut, and then Javon McKinley was actually a very underrated player. If they didn't have Sage Surratt, I probably would have him making the practice squad. As a Notre Dame fan, I did see him on offense make some pretty good plays as a physical receiver as well. So I really think you just have a bunch of darts being thrown here. And behind Perriman and Williams, which I don't feel confident in either being a number 1 receiver, you're looking for St. Brown, Cephas, or maybe even someone like a Sage Surratt or Chad Hansen to step up. So I don't love this receiver room a lot, to be honest. It's not very good, but I like them taking some chances. I really think Amon St. Brown could be the number 1 target, perhaps, even this year. If not, though, like a dynasty option would be a really good pick for Amon St. Brown, because I really think he has the highest potential of anybody in this room. Now, where there is a weakness at wide receiver, there is an absolute strength at tight end. They have TJ Hawkinson, who has turned into one of the better tight ends in the NFC, I would say. He was a pretty high draft choice, and he didn't do a whole lot right away. But he has turned into a pretty good tight end, and I do think he could be a pretty high target in this offense. Probably the safest thing you have, closest thing you have to a number 1 target in this offense. So he is going to have to be someone that Jared Goff will throw to and be able to trust. Because behind him you have Darren Fells, who spent some time here. Then he went over to Houston. Actually, to me, performed pretty well. So I was shocked that Houston decided to let him go. So he comes back here, and I think that's great. Some plans fell through. They originally were going to bring in Josh Hill from New Orleans. Makes sense, the connection. He decided to retire from football. I do think that he would have been a very, very good choice, but he chose to retire because Josh Hill has some speed, but he won't be playing for anybody. But Darren Fells was a good backup option. I think he's a great number 2 tight end in this situation. And now I actually want to talk about Hunter Bryant before I talk about Alize Mack, because if Hunter Bryant was healthy, he's, to me, a clear number 3 on this roster, as he spent time as that last year. I liked him coming out of Washington. He somehow went undrafted. Good pickup. So he would, if he comes back healthy, he will make the roster. He is dealing, I think I saw, with a non-football injury, or might have been an injury outside of the facility. So that is unfortunate for him. But if he comes back healthy, I truly think that he can be a number 3 in this room. Because if not, I don't like Alize Mack as an NFL roster level player right now. I would rather have him on the practice squad. But with what they have, you have to just roll with him. He at least has some experience and has that New Orleans connection with Dan Campbell. And behind him, I just don't... These are the guys also competing for that 3rd spot. I just don't think any of them are even practice squad level players. The closest thing to me would be Charlie Tomopo out of, I think it was South Dakota State last year. He just isn't practice squad level to me, and neither are the rest of them. So I just don't think you have the talent to kind of allow that to happen. Even though you could use a better 3rd tight end, they just don't have that really at their hands right now. So that's what they have. It's pretty good at tight end, I would say, especially if you have Fells, who I think is a startable player, as a second one, and then Hawkinson, who is probably a top 10, top 5 tight end. You're looking pretty good there. This is a big reason I really like this team, is the next position, the offensive line. I specifically love the direction they're going with it. I liked them a lot taking Penei Sewell in the draft. He fell right into their hands, and instead of reaching for somebody else, they just said, we're going to take the best player available. They are going to have to move him to right tackle, which is different than what he played at Oregon. He played all left tackle. Now, he is an absolute stud. By far my best offensive lineman in the draft. I think I had him as a top 3, top 5 player. He's an absolute stud. So he is really, really good. We'll see how it works flipping him to the other side. He's going to offer a lot of power for sure. I don't know if he's always great at knowing where to block people. He doesn't necessarily always follow the designed play. But the good news is he will always find someone to go block. He's pretty good at that, where he can naturally find someone and absolutely just destroy them in the blocking game. So it will be uncomfortable for him, so I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't succeed right away. But they picked a player with the highest upside, and I think it actually fits them pretty well. On the left side, we have Taylor Decker, who got a pretty big contract, and he is a pretty good tackle. Kind of like I talked with the Falcons, it's similar to like a Jake Matthews, where he's not an elite tackle, but you're definitely solid playing Taylor Decker over there, and you feel really comfortable with that, and you don't have to replace him. So you have 2 really, really good tackles, and I feel good about that. Then you also have Jonah Jackson, who performed pretty well as a rookie out of Ohio State. I did like that pick last year. I thought it filled a need for them, and that's definitely what happened. He stepped in and played pretty well, in my opinion. So I really think you're looking at a future there with those players, as well as Frank Ragnow, who they recently gave a big contract to. And I do think that it was worth it. People were shocked maybe by a center pick when he was first drafted, but I do think he's turned his career around and has performed relatively well. So you feel comfortable with 4 out of those 5. Then it's kind of a question here. I have them starting Logan Stenberg, who they picked out of Kentucky last year. Ended up not playing for them at all. He didn't get a single snap last season. So he's a wild card because if you don't love him there, you could possibly kick the tires on a Tyrell Crosby or Hal Vaitai, neither of which I think are great. But I'm, for now, rolling out the young offensive line and going with the upside there of Stenberg. But you potentially could start a guy like Tyrell Crosby or Hal Vaitai. I'm going to talk about them here on the backups. Crosby, ironically, was kind of replaced by Penicini at Oregon. Same thing kind of happens here. He started as a right tackle in this league, and now he's kind of kicked back into guard. You see it sometimes when young players are not able to succeed at tackle. I think a great example of a player that has had that happen recently and it worked out was Eric Flowers. Just was not comfortable at tackle for the Giants. Washington picks him up, they move him to guard, and he did better. Tyrell Crosby, I don't think it's the same case, though, as he's not really very athletic at all. He's more of a power player. They also brought in Hal Vaitai, who probably was the worst free agency signing for this team last year. Perhaps one of the worst in the entire league. I did not like that signing when it happened. You can see it a year later. They're probably not even starting him anymore. Maybe at right guard. I didn't like that signing at all. He was a backup in Philadelphia, and they gave him a bunch of money. But I do feel comfortable with them as backups. That's what I'll say is, as backups, I do think both of them can be pretty good. So it fits them well to have those two. Because then you don't have, I don't love Evan Brown as a backup center, but you need one. You're keeping him there. Dan Skipper as well is okay as a backup tackle, but him being your fourth tackle is great. You feel good with that. So I do like the direction they're going. It's just like, I keep saying like I talked about the Falcons, but that's why those teams are really, really close. Both are going young on the offensive line. I do think the Lions overall are more proven on the offensive line and probably have the higher ceiling out of the two, and a little bit better depth, that's another big reason why they're ranked ahead of the Falcons. And behind these guys, you have Tommy Cramer, undrafted, out of Notre Dame. I almost had him making the roster. I ended up finding another player I wanted to give a spot to, but I definitely think that he is an impactful player as an undrafted free agent, and within a year or two, he could be a roster-level player. There's also Matt Nelson, who when he stepped in has performed decent, coming out of Iowa. So those are both good options as well, if you end up having an injury or something and you need to elevate one. And then behind him, I just don't see a whole lot. I like Drake Jackson at center. I just think Evan Brown is more proven. And otherwise, I don't think Evan Heim or Darren Paolo are NFL roster players right now. So, I really like this offensive line. It's good now. It's good in the future. You have a high ceiling. So, I truly think this is one of their strengths on this team. And I think a good offensive line is really important for a team, especially now. Moving to the defensive side, let's start with the edge rushers. This is a position where a lot of wild cards are here. You feel pretty good about it. To me, you have 5, maybe even startable, but for sure, like rotation level guys. For sure. I think you definitely have the depth at this position. Trey Flowers, they gave that huge contract. Don't think he's necessarily performed up to being an elite pass rusher, but he is a number 1 level player. It's similar to what I talked about with Dante Fowler. I do think that Trey Flowers is better. But similar level where you're fine as a number 1 pass rusher. Don't feel a whole lot of confidence there. But I do think Trey Flowers is a number 1 level player, even if he hasn't always been elite. And behind him, Romeo Akwara started to really perform well last year and the year before. He has been developing into a pretty good edge rusher. And they also have his brother in Julian Akwara. So those two can kind of tag team off each other and both play pretty well. Julian Akwara, Julian had some injuries last year and dealt with that. But I do think I like that rotation up top. Deshaun Hand has not necessarily performed up to expectations. He started to play well, and then he just has not really done much. He hasn't had a sack in 2 years. But he has not done that much in the last few years. I do think you are willing to give him another year, though. or perhaps just ride out his contract and let him go in free agency. I do think he's still an NFL roster level player at this point. Then you have Charles Harris, who was kind of a bust for the Dolphins. They traded him to the Falcons. He didn't do a whole lot for them last year, but I once again think he's a rotation level player. So I do like that rotation of those 5 guys right there. You feel pretty good. Flowers and Akwara are both starters, and then the other Akwara, Hand, both can be rotational players, and Charles Harris brings some veteran leadership as well. Austin Bryant is probably the true wild card in this situation. I do think if you practice squad him, another team will take a chance on him, but I will say he's probably the player I would cut next if I had to cut a player on this team. He has not really done that much. I liked him coming out of Clemson, but he just has not done that much for this team, and I think the 5 guys ahead of him are for sure better. They brought in Joel Heath. He's on the reserve list right now. I honestly don't think he'd make the roster even if he was healthy. And then behind him they have Robert McCray. I don't think he's an NFL level player. So I don't have anybody making the practice squad here. You could put Austin Bryant there. I do like this edge room a lot. It doesn't have that superstar, but this depth is just really, really good. You have startable players and then a solid rotation that you can bring in. So I really like this edge room a lot, and that's a great strength. So is the defensive tackles. At one point, I kind of thought it was a bad move to pick 2 defensive tackles instead of going a wide receiver on day 2. But with who they got, I can understand that. Levi Onwuzurike was potentially the number 1 D tackle. I had Christian Barmore ahead of him. But he was, for some people, the best interior. And then Aleem McNeil was also a pretty highly rated player in this year's draft as well. So to get both of them was kind of smart. But let's first talk about Michael Brockers. Michael Brockers, they bring in from Los Angeles. It's ironic. He had like a quote saying that Stafford was a step up from Goff, and you're back to Goff now that you're over with Detroit now. So I do think he will offer some leadership. Good idea by Dan Campbell and the staff here to bring in a veteran who can kind of develop these guys are underneath him, because they have 3 young players underneath Michael Brockers. So I do think Brockers can step in, be a starter this year, and also just really be a leader in this locker room and show some leadership and veteran experience. So that's why I think they bring him in. Like I said, they brought in Levi Onwuzurike out of Washington, high upside for sure. So I think he can be involved. And then Aleem McNeil, a lot of power on McNeil, also some ability to pass rush. So you have those guys. And then let's not forget about John Penicini. I didn't love the pick last year out of Utah, but he performed pretty well last year when given opportunities. So I actually think he's proven to be an NFL level player. If they didn't take either of those rookies, he probably could be a second D tackle and get on the field a good amount. So I do like that rotation where they have a lot of depth on this defensive line room, and they can go with Brockers to start while these guys develop and then switch when needed. And behind him, I like Nick Williams. I still think he can play at a pretty high level, but he is definitely a cut candidate. He has not done a lot for this team, and his salary is relatively high. So I do think that they could end up cutting him if needed, but he's another kind of veteran. Now, on the practice squad, I have them keeping Jason Cornell. He is in an interesting situation where he didn't get a single, I think he was hurt all last year. So he didn't get any playing time at all. And that also shows the previous regime liked him. And it doesn't help him that he's going to be suspended for a few games to start the season. So I like his potential. I think he was kind of an unknown player in last year's draft. He ended up going in like the 7th round. So I do think that he is a roster level player, at least a practice squad. It's just the depth they have ahead of him and also the suspensions. I think they have to start with him on the practice squad here. And behind him, Kevin Strong was definitely borderline for me. I almost put him on the practice squad, decided to go younger. And then Brian Price, I don't know how he's honestly made it in the league this long. He's bounced from team to team, and I just don't think he's honestly that good at all. So I think those 2 are worth cutting. So overall, this is a good defensive line, defensive tackle room. You're really looking to bring Brockers to kind of develop the guys that are underneath them, and I like them bringing in a top few players. I question them bringing in 2 defensive tackles, but for those 2 to be the defensive tackles, it makes sense. So you're looking pretty good there on the defensive line. Then at linebacker, a little bit more of a question mark. Jamie Collins, he's bounced around with the Patriots, the Browns, so he's kind of been all over the place. He's not, in my opinion, a number 1 linebacker in any situation. He's going to be more of an outside linebacker, but he's more of a number 2 to me. And they could have the potential here of Alex Anzalone to be that first linebacker. They definitely brought him in because of the Dan Campbell connection. You're starting to see a theme here where they like to bring in those guys. So you're looking for those 2 to be your starters on the outside. Jelani Tavai, I think, will start as a starter at middle linebacker, but I didn't love that pick when it happened. Most people didn't. And he has not performed particularly well for this team at all. So I do think you could see a transition to Derek Barnes, who they picked out of Purdue this year, if Tavai is not working out. So I really think that he's on a short leash. You have Jalen Reeves Maven, who I've never been a huge fan of, but he has played decent for this team. He can be kind of an outside linebacker edge presence for them. Like I said, they brought in Derek Barnes from Purdue, and they also brought in Sean Dion Hamilton from Washington, who didn't necessarily always perform up to expectations, but I still think he can be a role player, NFL roster level player. So this is not a great linebacker room. You have some decent players individually, but there is no star in this room. And it's just overall decent at best, I would say. Now, I have them keeping Reggie Gilbert on the practice squad. That was close. I don't think Anthony Pittman or Tavante Beckett are NFL-level players. So, overall, this is probably one of their biggest weaknesses. I do not like this linebacker room very much, and I just don't think it has that much upside. If you're going to have young guys like this, you want some potential, and I do think Derek Barnes could have that. Otherwise, I think it could be just the future of him and Anzalone, really. Otherwise, I don't love what they have at linebacker. Corner is a very interesting room for them because it's a lot of young players and a few veterans, but have a variety of skill sets. You have Jeff Okudah, who was viewed as an all-around player last year coming out of Ohio State. He didn't play particularly well. I think he dealt with some injury issues as well. I do think he can still be a number 1 corner. I still feel confident in that. They decided to let go of Desmond Trufant. That was an interesting move. But I do think Jeff Okudah can still be number 1. Still be a really good player on this defense. So I actually feel pretty good about him being a number 1 corner. Not incredibly confident. I would rather have him be a number 2 for one more year, but I feel better about this than I do about some of the other corners we've talked about already for other teams. Behind him, they have Amani Orwarier, who I liked coming out of Penn State. I think he was drafted much lower than I thought he would be. And he's going to be your man-to-man corner. So I do think that he could be a little bit grabby with his hands, but overall plays pretty well, and he can be an outside guy. You also bring in Quentin Dunbar from Seattle. He's played relatively well at times, shows some speed, can play a little bit of zone as well. He, I think, is a good idea to bring in based on who else they have in this room. You're looking pretty young. They bring in Efatu Melifonwu, who is kind of a converted safety, kind of played a little bit of both at Syracuse. I think he's going to be more like kind of a box nickel corner type of situation, in my opinion. So you could also put him in the slot, perhaps. So I think it was a really good choice for them overall. Good value, played pretty well at the Senior Bowl. And then they bring in Corn Elder, who is a slot guy, one of the top-graded slot defenders in the NFL. So he can play there if you don't feel comfortable trying someone else at slot. I was so close to keeping Michael Ford as well on this roster. I decided to go elsewhere. You could potentially flip him and Austin Bryant, because I just think they have guys here that they already are looking to develop, and they have a variety of skill sets. But Michael Ford has been a really good special teams player for them. He's my priority on the practice squad. But if not, then I think he could make the roster. Behind him, they don't have that much. This corner room is not particularly strong, but I think it has a lot of potential given a little bit of time. They have a wide variety of skill sets. You have some man and zone, you have some press, you have some nickel ability, you have some slot. So I really think it's a versatile group, and that's what you're looking for at corner. So I actually feel pretty good about that room. Safety is decent. Not great. I think Deron Harmon, honestly, was a big loss for them. He ended up going to Atlanta. They kind of just have some similar players here. They have Tracy Walker, who is a big hitter, has dealt with some penalty issues. I still think he could be a startable player, but I don't think he's a number one safety. Will Harris has not necessarily performed well either. They bring in Dean Marlowe from Buffalo, maybe to bring something to this room with coverage. Because the other two, I would say, are closer to hard hitters. Walker specifically is kind of an old school, strong safety, big tackler. And then C.J. Moore is kind of my priority. I guess that's why I chose him over Mike Ford. Both are really good at special teams. So I have C.J. Moore staying because I think he was their best special teams player last year overall. And then they do have some intriguing guys that you could keep on the practice squad. I have them keeping Godwin Igwebuike. He's bounced around the league quite a bit, but I have him staying there. Elijah Holder is okay. Otherwise, I like Jalen Elliott a little bit, but otherwise, not a whole lot. So, in conclusion here, I don't like their safety room a whole lot. It's very kind of bland. I don't think Walker or Harris have developed to what you thought they could be. They're borderline startable players. So, in conclusion, I think their defense has the right idea, the right culture. I mean, at least you get that with Walker and Harris. Just bite your, when you get knocked down, bite the other person's kneecap off, or whatever Dan Campbell was trying to say in that press conference. I think those guys fit that bill. I just don't think that this defense has a whole lot of star players, but I think they do mesh together well as a unit. Now, their special teams is not great. Randy Bullock is a borderline kicker to me now. He's kind of fallen off quite a bit. Jack Fox, I think, is a decent punter. You also have Molback at long snapper, who's just been there for a while. I don't think Wright or Daly are NFL-level players. So you do feel like, I guess, on this special teams. It's not great. I like Molback. Otherwise, Fox is developing. I don't like their kicker situation, though. So that's it there. So we just looked at offense and defense. So now let's take a look at their schedule. We are going to jump into the schedule, and we do have our first situation of where the previous team had maybe a higher win total. It might be tied. I'll explain that in a minute. And I said this could eventually happen just because, remember, I based this off of roster and overall culture, like a team, instead of going through and picking who I think will win the most games. Because as we know, schedules can be affected, teams can be affected. There's just a lot of wild cards that go into it. So it's really, to me, the best way to do it is to rank the teams overall. So I do believe that on a baseline, if we're starting here, I do think that the Lions base is higher than the Falcons. I think people are underrating the Lions as a team. Do I think they're very good? No. But I really like what Dan Campbell's doing. And it's not like they have the worst roster in the NFL. But, for example, the Falcons, to me, had an easier schedule than what the Lions have here. They play the Niners, who are bouncing back. The Packers, I did something interesting here. I have not done this in the previous episodes. I don't know what's happening with this Aaron Rodgers situation. Here's what I'm basically going off of. With him, they're ranked pretty highly. And that's why I have it initially as an L. If they don't, I'm going to call for sure the divisional games. I'm thinking if nothing comes out about Aaron Rodgers by the time I unveil I guess, some of the other division opponents, any that are below the Packers. I might include a 50-50 on it just because I feel like if there is no Aaron Rodgers, that could be a big shift. And also, no, that's going to be a huge wild card in the grand scheme of this entire series. So I more so have the Packers with Aaron Rodgers. So I do think without him, they'd still be better than this team. But what I'm trying to say is, like, kind of in the upcoming videos, we'll see if by the time I get close to the Packers of where they could be, if something happens on that. So I think that the Lions, honestly, if there is no Aaron Rodgers, have the ability to split them, which is why I put a /50. So if you get that, you're looking at 5-12, which would be what I had the Falcons at. But then you face the Ravens, who I think are a tough team. I think they can overall split with almost anybody in this entire division. I think that this division could be pretty competitive. So I have them splitting with the Bears and the Vikings. I also think that the Bengals are not particularly great. They have the potential to fight for that spot. The Rams I have as being a loss. And the Eagles, I think, also could be a winnable game. And then they have their bye week. A perfect bye week, in my opinion. I like it in the middle or late. So this is right in the middle. Also to mention, I may have forgotten to mention, but the 50s mean, if you haven't been watching this series before, I color code it, so I'm basically saying they'll win one of those two games. So the colors go with each other, like blue goes with blue and that type of thing. So keep that in mind when looking at these games. I just think playing the AFC North for pretty much all the NFC North teams is pretty tough. The Steelers and the Browns, I think, are both losable games. Then they have a stretch where they could get some wins between the Bears, Vikings, and Broncos. The Cardinals, I think, are going to be a very good team. As mentioned in the last episode, I'm splitting with the Falcons. I think the Seahawks are, going to be pretty good. As I mentioned with the Packers, depending on what happens, could split, could be a loss. So I have them at 4-13, which, yes, I know that's below what the Falcons were. But with a little bit of, without Aaron Rodgers, that's tied. And I just think that this team actually is decent. They just don't have they have a really hard schedule. So looking at the awards, I'm giving my Offensive Player of the Year to TJ Hawkinson. Could give it to Jared Goff. Otherwise, I don't think Swift is ready to take that next step yet this year. And I think that Hawkinson is going to be this number one target in the offense, I think, overall. Then I have Trey Flowers being the Defensive Player of the Year. You could go with him. You could go with Jeff Okudah. That was probably my other top option. In my opinion, those would be the guys I would choose between. So, or even Romeo Akwara you could throw in there too. But I think Flowers will be a really good defensive presence on the edge. I have Amani Orwarier as my breakout player of the year. You could go a number of directions with that. I just think that he will step into that number 2 corner role. Or even if he's number 3, and he brings something different with that man-to-man coverage. And in my rookie of the year is Penei Sewell, because he was their first pick. I think he is going to be good, even at right tackle, even if he's switching. But then otherwise, watch out for Amon St. Brown. I truly think he could be a deep sleeper. So we just took a look at the Detroit Lions, and thank you so much for sticking along this long in the video. If you are still watching, I really appreciate that. So we're getting through the rankings here. Next episode will be number 27, and we'll take a look at what team that will be in the next one. So, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.